Good morning, guys. I'm coming to you, obviously, via our brand new projectors. Fantastic. I really planned on being with you live and in person through a series of events that actually began and go back prior to COVID. Had a trip planned with Mallory. I saved and saved, plot and schemed for a number of years to take my wife to her dream destination for our 10-year-ish anniversary birthday kind of experience extravaganza to Italy. And of course that didn't happen for more than 2 years. And then we got the call after the United States dropped all travel restrictions a little more than a week ago. We got the call that you're either going to use this reservation or lose it. So Mallory pulled off a miracle of one-way flights in which we're going to get to see all of the United States and Europe to get to our destination in Italy. So we're going to have a great time. She hates flying. I love it. So this is great. I sleep better on an airplane than I do in my own home. I just know no one can call me. Oftentimes I'm asleep while we're still taxiing. And so Mallory will wake me up and grip my hand until all of the blood leaves my hand, okay, as she holds it as we take off. So that's how different we are, shocker to you, but we're both gonna have a great time once we get there. So I am recording this message for you. We will be back by Monday, as long as there's no cancellations or anything crazy that may happen along the way. But that is our plan, to be back on Monday, and then the following Sunday, we will close out this Esther series, and then we'll be moving into a new series that will be examining the second person of the Trinity, who would later be known as Jesus, but he actually shows up in the Old Testament, and it gives a deeper, fuller view of this person that we would know to be Jesus and his ministry and kind of who he is. It gives a really interesting profile when you take these stories from the Old Testament and pair them up with his ministry in the Gospels. So that's what's coming. We're going to march through all of chapter 7 and then into just the first couple verses in Esther chapter 8. So let's march through that now. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. As they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked Queen Esther, "What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as female and male slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Here's the thing I want to just highlight in this whole story. And I'm going to grab a little kind of a added little object lesson here. We all have things that we've experienced in life that color how we see the world, how we process the world around us. For some of us, it was experiences that we've had. For some of us, it's things that have happened to us that was maybe even against our will. For others of us, it may have been decisions that we made, maybe even perhaps that we regret. All of those things inform us, the way that we grew up, the way that our parents spoke to us, the way that we were raised. All of that kind of stuff plays into this, all right? And then there's also our spiritual life. Our spiritual life also plays into how we see the world, how we process the world, how we process information, and how we're going to look at it moving forward. And I just want you to think of it this way, okay? Every last one of us, those experiences, the things that have happened, the things that happened to us, the choices that we made, the way that we grew up, all of that, think of it like a pair of glasses, all right? I still see what you see, okay? But everything around me is colored now by what I have placed over my eyes. I'm not blind to what's happening, but it does impact to some degree the way that I take in that information. And that is a really healthy thing to know about you and your story, okay? Because we all wear a pair of these, and we all have triggers, and we all have things that when this is challenged in some way, shape, or form, all of a sudden a person may react to you in a radically different way than you've ever experienced. In a radically different way than you've ever experienced in your life, and you can't understand why. That's because that lens may be informing their response, okay? And that's so, so important to understand, because here's what's happening. If you haven't noticed, up to this point in the story, Xerxes, King Xerxes, is yet to make a decision in which he is not either in the moment, okay, completely drunk, okay, or alcohol is nearby. If you go back and look at the story, there is, at some point he has a drink in his hand with every major decision he either makes in the moment or is about to make. Now listen, I love, they call it Lutheran beverages, you know, ice cold beer. I'm not someone who's anti-alcohol, okay? But there is something really interesting about this dynamic in the story. This is, to some degree, part of his lens. It's something that he puts on, and it has affected his decision-making radically up to this point. It's very, very damaging, and he's made terrible decisions. On top of that, his way of looking at the world is self-preservation. Every decision he's made up to this point is about making sure that he keeps his place of power within his kingdom. He has no accountability to speak of, none whatsoever, okay? So the only thing that really keeps him between one side of the ditch or the other is whether or not he senses it could cost him his title, his role, his position, and his power. At the same time, you could take a look at Haman, his evil number two. He has a lens. Now, for some odd reason, that lens, I don't know, we won't know this side of heaven what that's about. What is with the anger, the bitterness, the rage, the single-minded, evil perspective and lens that he looks at the Jewish people and Mordecai? What he is unable to see in his life, because of the lens that he has on, he can't recognize how good he has it. This story doesn't even happen if he can just lay off the fact that one guy in the whole kingdom doesn't want to kneel to him. He's second in command. He has so much power, money, and wealth that at one point in the story, he attempts to bribe the most powerful person on the planet. How wealthy does he have to be? So he has everything, but he's still miserable, you see? And he's still miserable because he has this lens. And that lens, for him, besides having an evil heart, is he has the ability to hold a grudge that drives him to rage. He's not thinking. He's not really thinking. And when he's thinking, he's just thinking about himself. That's where Haman and Xerxes have this in common. It's all about me, self-preservation, power, more. And it leads them to make terrible decisions. Xerxes, I think, in part, because most of the big decisions he makes, he's drunk or about to be drunk. If you look at the story, it's always a part of his decision-making. With Haman, he is filled with rage and anger. So I would just hit pause. Do you know why you make the decisions that you make? When you are acting out of character for yourself, do you know what that's about? And don't be quick to make it about other people. That's all of our gut reaction, even myself. Moments when you know, and you'll know the difference. When you respond in a way to a situation or to a person that is not your normal heart or your mind, like your normal, like who you are, but this other thing comes out of you, and you'll feel it, guys. You'll feel it in your gut. You're actually like speaking from like emotional throw up and sickness. And it's when this other person, and that means that there's something about that lens that just got threatened, the way that you're looking at it all. And that's when people respond in ways that is so unhealthy. And I would point this out to you. For most of us who get into the blame game, underneath blame is shame. Blame and shame. And if you know someone in your life who's constantly blaming other people, there's probably something they're ashamed of. Something has driven them to shame. Things they've either done or things that have happened to them. And so they kick it out. Blame, blame, blame. Everybody else. When you see someone who's really, really angry, okay, most likely there's something they're highly insecure about or something they're terribly afraid of. And it's at the core of why they act out the way that they act. And you know, there's a reason, and it plays itself out here in a very real way. There's a reason why Jesus tells us to forgive. He doesn't tell us to be friends and buddies with everyone who hurt us. He doesn't tell us to lock arms and skip through life together and become best of friends, right? Let's share an ice cream cone like that. He doesn't tell us to do that. He does tell us to forgive. And he tells us to forgive not because the person is even worthy of it. He tells us to forgive because it'll destroy you. It'll rot your heart, your mind, and your soul out from the inside. And if you don't forgive, that toxic stuff, it stays here. And you become a prisoner to it. You become a prisoner to those glasses and that lens that you look at the world for the rest of your life. So I would just challenge you to just examine that, because these are major issues. One is in part is all about self, but there's like a thing about the partying and the, you know, whatever. It's like it's a habit and a hang-up that Xerxes has. You look at Haman, and him, he's driven by self-preservation and self. He's also driven by just anger and rage and hatred. And if you have that living inside of you, it's not everybody else's fault. And I would really challenge you to look at that. And in most cases, you will find something healthy that can come out of just forgiveness, because somebody or something may be at the core of what that is. I can't encourage you enough. Counseling is a beautiful thing. We haven't done enough in the church in the past to normalize and encourage Christian, gospel-centered counseling. Get that stuff out of here, whatever that is. Because that's just where they're a cautionary tale. When you're driven by self and where you're driven by all these things that are not a godly lens, you make decisions that are to your detriment. And there is the flip. Look at Mordecai. He's not perfect, not by any stretch. He's one of the many broken pieces that God uses to pull off this beautiful mosaic. That's all God is working with, is broken pieces. No one in here is perfect. No one in here should be deified in this story. They all got stuff. They're not flawless. But remember, go back, previous chapters, Mordecai is part of that fasting, spiritual alignment. See, that lens that you can also put on can also be your spiritual lens. That's what God gives us, new eyes, a new heart, new ears, to help us combat whatever that is that we're used to putting on, to help us inform the world, to help us see the world, renew our minds. Romans 12 would tell us that we'd relate to the world in a radically different way. That's the beauty of the gospel, when that's the lens that you put on to see the world. And that's a battle for some of us, because we want to go to that old pair of glasses. But he's offering us a different way to see what happened to us, offering us a different understanding of what we've gone through, and gives us purpose. Remember, that's what Esther has. For a time such as this, that's purpose. She was pulled out of her home. She had every reason to be bitter and angry, but she's not. She's quite measured. See, her spiritual life informs her thought life, informs her heart, and informs the way that she handles the situation. She's sitting across from the table from someone who wants to destroy her and her whole family. But look how controlled she is. It's not just like a manipulation thing. She's able to keep her head in such a profound way. And look at her spiritual life. She's not perfect either. And she shouldn't, we shouldn't make her into some deity either. She's got some dirt under her nails in this story. But she submits her life to God. And he uses a broken person in a profound way for a time such as this. That's so important. And then look at the difference. Mordecai is thinking about the other people, his people, right? Esther thinking about all people. What are the first two people, Xerxes and Haman? All they're thinking about is self-preservation, right? What's Esther's mindset? If I die, if I perish, I'm willing to perish. See how different? I'm willing to lay down my life for the cause. Put it all on the line. And she's able to take bold steps, and she's able to walk through life and deal with it differently because it's not about Esther. And for Mordecai, it's not about Mordecai. That's huge, huge. Your good friend of mine over the years has become Chad Williams, Navy SEAL, and we've gotten to do some really cool things over the last couple of years. And the thing that always blew me away was just what they call Hell Week. And that's a great title for that, what those guys go through. And there's elements and parts of it that just blow my mind of how they do what they do and how those guys even get through that week. I'll never forget Chad telling me, he said there were guys that they just knew, they were physical specimens, that they were just going to breeze through it, and they for certain were going to be on a team. And there were other guys that were like the ugly ducklings of the group, the runts, that were never going to make it. And he goes, it never failed. Like our minds were blown that the guys that we just knew were going to make it wouldn't make it. And the guys that we thought would never make it, made it. And he said the one common thread he noticed is that the guys who had a Bible verse written on the inside of their hat, or someone else's name, grandparent, mom, dad, a sibling, maybe someone, a good friend who had passed away, like in Chad's case. It was the people who went into Hell Week who were doing it for something bigger than themselves, for a greater cause than themselves, for someone outside of themselves was willing to lay down the full extent of their comfort zone and everything else, their lives if need be. See, that's Esther. Who are you living life for? You living life for you? And if you are, that runs out quick. It'll never be enough. You'll run into some of the same issues and problems that Xerxes and Haman run into, the same limitations. But the contrast is that Mordecai and Esther are not living for themselves. They're living for a cause greater than themselves, and they're living for other people outside of themselves. It's sacrificial living. So this is just kind of some of the things to consider up to this point as this story plays out. And here's where things pick up in verse 5. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" This is hilarious. At this point, Haman is just probably just holding on to Esther. "Please spare my life. Please don't let me die. I don't want to die." But at this point, the tipping point is now moving against him, right? And at this point, everything he's doing is now working against him. See how that happened now? Now it's working the other way. And don't be confused. The king, while he's impulsive, he is incredibly impulsive, and seemingly, at least in this story, intoxicated most of the time, okay? What he knows also is at this point, Haman's account is overdrawn. He's now spending and costing more chips and more in the account of Xerxes than he actually has. So you see, Xerxes knows that he has already taken from all of his provinces and in his entire kingdom most likely young ladies from most of the families, maybe not most, but many of the families throughout his kingdom. He took them. Remember the very beginning of the story? He could get away with that once. But if he chooses Haman in this moment over Esther, he's got to go through that whole thing again. And do you think his next big party, his big shindig for 6 months, the way this story started out, do you think it's going to end the exact same way with everyone going, great party, boss? Think it's going to end that way? No. He knows it. So in a way, now even his self-preservation is working against him. It's not that his character changes on the other side of the story. It's so flipped. Now, in such the fashion and favor that out of preservation, he's going to go with Esther. Now watch what happens. As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. So what we're going to look at next week is this whole dynamic of how King Xerxes is seemingly unable to change his course of direction. He's kind of able to sort of amend his edict, but he's not able to clearly just go in another direction. And we're going to look at that next week. And along with just like this whole dynamic of what's happening now between God's people and the initial edict and timeline. Because keep in mind, this all started out, it was in month 1. And once they cast the lot, it landed on month 12. So the timetable is now so much so now leaning in favor of God's people. And we're going to sew up this whole series next week by kind of examining and focusing on those two elements. You can see the plot twist as it unfolds in this story. And you can see based on all of the past victories and successes written in God's word, all of which the disciples would have known, from Moses, Abraham, Joshua, David. This story where evil seems to lose and good and righteous people who seek God seem to win. In fact, their power expands, land and prominence, and they rise up in victory. You can see how God flips the script, plot twist. It would be almost as if Esther would be impaled, and as though somehow evil would win, and win in a dramatic fashion. The likes of Haman and Xerxes would rise to even greater prominence and power. And yet that's sort of an odd dynamic of how things play out with the ministry of Jesus. See, it's the person of Jesus who would die the horrible death. It's not the person of Jesus that would be spared. And it's the disciples who would run for their lives. They wouldn't be given signet rings, land and estates, and places of power and authority. You can see how confusing this would be, because this is about an earthly kingdom, the story of Esther, being secured for a group of people for a time such as this, and that out of which the person of Jesus would eventually come. But it's temporal and temporary. What God had in mind was something that would last forever. And so there was no way that there was any other option then the central figure of that story, Jesus, to have a different moment and a different experience than the likes of Esther. Spoke truth in much the same way, identified evil in much the same way, but the plot twist would work out very differently. He would be the one to die a horrible, public, and gruesome death. His disciples and those nearby who loved him, for a time, would be hidden in fear and in worry that maybe none of this was real at all, bewildered and confused yet again by how the story seemed to play out. And that's the power of 3 days later. Perfect love on the cross meeting perfect power in the empty tomb. That what would be secured is a kingdom that lasts all eternity and for all time. That this royal family is something you can be a part of. That you carry that name and the ring of a king on your hand, marked on your forehead and on your heart. A family member who stands to inherit the riches and the mercy, the love and the grace and the very kingdom of God in heaven for all eternity. That's the significance of what Jesus has done for you. That's the significance of God being the one who would die, rather than simply just being spared for a moment in time. You're deeply loved. God holds the events of your life in the very palm of his hand. Trust him with what's happening with you in your mind, in your heart, in your gut, in the difficult times. If something's keeping you back and you find yourself in a disposition that's more like Haman or Xerxes, seek him like you see in this story. And by God's grace, he meets us. He prompts us in our hearts to go after him. And he meets us right there. This is the beauty of God reaching down and initiating this beautiful thing in our relationship with him. His beautiful work to call us out of the mess that we once knew, to call us out of the circumstances that we think are hopeless and pointless and random, and reveal to us the purpose that he has, the way that he will move in, with, and under human events, and in your life as well. That's how great our God is. That's how deep his love is for you. Let's pray. God, we just thank you so much for your grace, your mercy, and your power. We thank you for the ways that you work through human events. It's just absolutely beautiful. So wherever we are at this morning, wherever we're struggling this morning, we submit all of that to you. We love you and we trust you. Maybe we have a hang-up of some kind, a habit of some kind. Maybe we're stuck in anger, depression, resentment. Maybe that's the lens that we see the world. It's hard for us to even imagine there being purpose or a reason. We desperately want peace. Call that which is toxic in us out. Give us a new lens to see this world, to understand the events of the past, the struggles of the present, the challenges of the future through the lens that you give us. We thank you for your love, your grace, and your mercy. It's in your name, Jesus. Amen.